Don Lemon said, I'm leaving X. There's no good discussions to be had here.
I have loved connecting with all of you on Twitter and then on X for all of these years. But it's time for me to leave the platform.
You don't like criticism. If you want to get into this game, the online game's different. And in the online game, you get judged by who you fucking actually are, dude. It's not about your producers and your teleprompter, and you're on your own. And if people think you're stupid, you're going to hear it. And it might be because you're stupid.
Our old pal Don Lemon has resurfaced, or is about to resurface. And I realize that the magnanimous move is to say, good for Don. He got canceled off of CNN, and now he's reinventing himself on Twitter. Well, that's not what I say. I think he's disgusting. He hates America. He hates Republicans. And I'm not looking forward to his voice reemerging other than to mock it, which I 100% plan to do.
Joe Rogan and Megyn Kelly just took Don Lemon's reputation, threw in a blender, and pulverized it beyond recognition. With Rogan's raw, unfiltered takedown and Megyn's razor-sharp precision, they shredded what was left of Lemon's media legacy, like a stack of outdated cue cards. There was no mercy, no sugarcoating, just brutal honesty and biting wit. If you thought Lemon's fall from grace was bad, wait until you hear how they dismantle his career with savage humor and surgical strikes.
How great was watching him realize in real time how stupid Don Lemon is?
What do you mean by woke mind virus? Woke mind virus is when you stop caring about people's skills and their integrity, and you start focusing instead on gender and race and other things that are different from that.
This whole idea about DEI, if you go woke or whatever, you go broke, that's not necessarily true.
John, choose your question carefully. There's 5 minutes left.
It is part of a pattern, and it ties in with the allegations that have been made against him recently that he was screaming at his co-host Caitlin Collins because she had the temerity to interrupt him, and he was annoyed. It's hard to be demoted from the primetime solo anchor to the morning show co-anchor, having to share your set with these annoying women. Thank God they're in their prime. At least he wasn't subjected to that indignity.
Joe Rogan didn't exactly tiptoe into the arena when it came to Don Lemon. If Rogan had a mic in one hand and a flamethrower in the other, you could argue the mic was the gentle part. He touring with that signature mix of curiosity, disdain, and open-mouthed exasperation that makes his takedown so brutal to watch. It was like watching a guy examine a cockroach wearing a tuxedo. Equal parts disgust and fascination. You could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to make sense of how Don Lemon not only survived, but somehow thrived in mainstream media for so long. It was like decoding hieroglyphics carved into a disco ball.
Did you see this interview where Don Lemon interviews some dude on the street?
No.
The guy's telling Don Lemon, like, I don't trust all these sources you're saying. This is so
Yeah. Who is the real president-elect, do you think?
Donald Trump.
Democratic lawmakers in Washington are calling Elon Musk President Musk now.
What's? Wait a second. No one said that.
Google right now, President Musk, and see what comes up.
No. But that's already a loaded question, you realize.
Give me the sources.
Axios, Business Insider. Oh. We don't trust any of these. The common man doesn't trust any of this. ABC News, Washington Post. I don't trust any of these. We're the common man. We don't trust any of these. Independent news, we are the ones that own the news now. People trust me. They don't trust MSNBC.
Dude, that is incredible.
To Rogan, Don Lemon wasn't just a symptom of what's wrong with legacy media. He was a full-blown case study worthy of his own wing in the Museum of Manufactured Outrage. Rogan didn't see Lemon as a hapless anchor swept up in modern news chaos. No, to him, Don was a chaos, a smug teleprompter in human form, spewing scripted outrage while sipping overpriced espresso and pretending it all came from some deep well of genuine intellectual substance.
And Don Lemon comes out with a post on X saying, it starts as follows: I've heard you. And today I'm back, bigger, bolder, freer. I've heard you. Like the masses are clamoring. Where's Don? What we need?
They've been crying out for Don.
Come.
Joe couldn't help but marvel at Don Lemon's gift for projecting smug superiority while knowing so little. It was like watching a guy in a captain's hat steer a boat straight into a rock, then blame the ocean for not getting out of the way. Lemon had this rare talent for alienating both sides of the aisle at once, which Joe found almost impressive. You had to be truly dedicated to misunderstanding everyone to pull that off so consistently.
What Elon said was so apt. He said Don Lemon was doing CNN off CNN.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that. You're on the internet. Have conversation with a dude. Don't just berate him with questions.
Yeah.
Allow
You're
him
gonna get me? Let's
to express
talk.
himself.
Let's talk.
Enough
Like,
with the gotcha.
Have you thought about the difference between free speech and hate speech? And like, where is the line? Like, do you think about the line? Do you think it's like more important that people decide what the line is?
And then there was a fall. Don Lemon's glorious primetime implosion that booted him from his cushy perch with all the grace of a drunken giraffe on roller skates. Joe saw it as a cosmic correction. The media universe realized it had a virus, and slamming Control plus Alt plus Delete. He broke it down with clinical precision, pointing out how Don's smugness had ballooned into a cartoonish parody of itself long before the final crash.
I just have a little reminder for you of who Don Lemon is and why we can't stand him. There you go.
Donald Trump couldn't find Ukraine on a map if you had the letter U and a picture of an actual physical crane next to it. He knows that this is, an administration defined by ignorance of the world.
The people who aided and abetted Trump are stupid. I've lived in several red states. There are a lot of friends who I had to really get rid of.
Rogan pointed out that Don Lemon's downfall wasn't shocking. It was inevitable, like gravity doing what gravity does. The second Lemon tried to defy logic. Reality was bound to yank him back down with all the grace of a dropped bowling ball. Rogan's takedown wasn't loud or bombastic. It was methodical, like a stand-up comedian wielding a scalpel instead of a mic. He peeled back Lemon's contradictions, his smug condescension, and his complete inability to read a room without a GPS, exposing each flaw one by one. To Joe, Don Lemon was that kid in school who tried to sound smart by reading the dictionary out loud, but always picked the words with silent letters, and pronounced every single one of them loudly. There was a special kind of contempt in Rogan's voice when he talked about how Lemon treated his audience. It wasn't just the arrogance, though that was always cranked to code red. It was the assumption that viewers were too dumb to notice. Rogan, who built his brand on raw, unfiltered conversation and genuine curiosity, couldn't wrap his head around how Lemon made a career out of talking down to people he didn't even bother to understand. Joe's perspective wasn't just about ratings or terrible takes. It was about respect, or in Lemon's case, the absolute void of it. And then there was a delicious irony of Don Lemon's identity politics backfiring in spectacular fashion. For a guy who prided himself on checking every box, watching him go down in flames was like seeing a human bingo card self-combust. Rogan found it poetic, almost Shakespearean. If Shakespeare wrote with memes and razor-sharp sarcasm instead of quills and sonnets.
Like they didn't have an alternative.
When Don Lemon goes on with Sanjay Gupta and says, actually, it really is a veterinary medicine. It really is deworming horses.
This was the lie. He goes, it's not a lie to say it's also used as horse medicine. He goes,
that's not what you said.
Yeah, that's not what you said. You didn't say this drug, which also is used for horses. Of what relevance is that?
It doesn't have any relevance. Exactly what you're talking about with penicillin and with like a gigantic number of medicines that also have veterinary applications. But by doing that, you just proved my point.
Then came the media rehabilitation tour. Rogan couldn't help but laugh at Don Lemon's attempt to rebrand himself, like a washed-up boy band member going solo after getting kicked out for lip-syncing. A new podcast here, a desperate social media pivot there. Each attempt to stay relevant landed with the grace of a lead balloon in a world that had already moved on. To Joe, it was like watching someone try to start a fire with soggy matches in a hurricane. Sad, mildly entertaining, and ultimately pointless. Megyn Kelly, on the other hand, didn't come in swinging like Rogan. She brought the courtroom instead. She arrived armed with receipts, closing arguments, and the unflinching stare of someone who'd survived a media grinder and knew exactly where to look for the rot. Where Joe went for the chokehold, Megyn went for the autopsy. She dissected Lemon with the icy precision of a forensic expert, peeling back the layers of his career like an onion steeped in narcissism, only to find a faint whiff of expired relevance underneath. She charted his decline from respected journalist to ideological ventriloquist dummy, exposing how Don had traded integrity for applause, truth for trending topics. To Megyn, Lemon embodied everything wrong with corporate media's obsession with identity over merit and virtue, signaling over substance.
You have to stop demonizing people and realize the biggest terror threat in this country is white men.
Your geography, knowing other countries, sipping your latte.
All those lines on the map.
Only the Melitas know where Ukraine is.
I think we have to stop coddling people when it comes to this and the vaccine, saying, oh, you can't shame them. You can't call them stupid. You can't call them silly. Yes, they are. The people who are not getting vaccines, who are believing the lies on the internet instead of science, it's time to start shaming them. What else? Or leave them behind.
Megyn found it deliciously ironic that Don Lemon, who'd spent years crafting his image as the enlightened moral compass of cable news, watched that compass spin wildly off axis the second he was asked to share airtime. His ego couldn't process equality, especially, as Megyn pointed out, with her trademark edge when it came to female colleagues. It was the kind of irony that didn't even need a punchline. Just hold it up to the light and let it glisten for everyone to see. Megyn also had a field day with Lemon's signature condescension, comparing to the smugness of someone who just discovered TED Talks and now quotes him at dinner parties, as if he'd written the script himself. She noted that Lemon never seemed to grasp that television is supposed to connect people, not serve as a stage for self-important lectures. Every time he opened his mouth, it felt less like news and more like a sermon from a man who thought he was Moses, but whose GPS only pointed to the nearest Starbucks. She didn't hold back on the hypocrisy either. Lemon, who built his brand on progressive posturing, often revealed open disdain for anyone who didn't match his lofty standard of wokeness or intellect. Megyn found this endlessly amusing, because for a man so obsessed with appearing brilliant, Don Lemon had an uncanny knack for saying things that made people question evolution itself.
Of medicines that also have veterinary applications. But by doing that, you just prove my point. They don't even understand what they just did. You think no one's, like, it's going to end with you? See, because it used to be that way. They would say something and no one would have recourse.
Do you know what this is?
But when you're saying something, and then the person you're saying it about has literally 10 times the audience you do. You dumb motherfucker. Do you know what you did? You just proved my point.
It wasn't just that Don Lemon was wrong. It was that he was confidently wrong. Loudly, relentlessly, and with facial expression that suggested he believed he was curing cancer simply by telling everyone what to think. And when it came to Lemon's infamous moments, Megyn didn't flinch. She dug into the archives and dragged out every pretentious monologue, every cringeworthy on-air exchange, every instance where Don's face practically screamed, asterisk, I've skimmed half a Malcolm Gladwell book, so now I'm an oracle. Asterisk. But Megyn didn't just mock it. She connected the dots. She showed how these moments weren't flukes. They were the natural byproduct of someone who'd stopped listening years ago and built himself an echo chamber lined with mirrors. She also couldn't ignore how the media treated his exit. No sweeping industry reckoning, no soul-searching op-eds, just a quiet reshuffling of deck chairs while the Titanic sank in plain sight. Megyn made it brutally clear. Don wasn't fired for being too radical or fearless. He was fired for being too irritating, too self-absorbed, too much a liability at a time when even corporate news giants needed to pretend they respected their viewers. His downfall wasn't tragic. It was inevitable and long overdue.
Sure, Jan. I mean, bullshit. He's not. In fact, hold on, stand by. I've got it on my.
Sure, Jan. He's got more. Yes.
He's shown us who he is.
What fascinated both Rogan and Megyn Kelly was how someone could be so thoroughly detached from reality while working in an industry built to report on it. Don Lemon didn't just miss the mark. He dragged the mark to an entirely different wall and then scolded everyone for failing to hit it. From their separate corners, Joe and Megyn laid bare this fundamental truth. Don Lemon didn't implode because of one bad take or slip-up. He imploded because he was never truly connected to the world he claimed to interpret for everyone else. From his podcast perch, Rogan hammered home the point that the public had outgrown people like Lemon. Audiences today are sharper, more skeptical. They don't want to be lectured. They want a conversation. And Don, bless his primetime heart, never learned when to shut up and listen. Megyn, meanwhile, delivered her verdict with the calm precision of a surgeon. Don Lemon wasn't canceled. He was revealed, exposed as a relic from an era when snark masqueraded as insight and smugness passed for authority. She didn't celebrate his collapse. She diagnosed it. Together, Joe and Megyn created a symphony of mockery, each playing their own instrument. Rogan was a guitar riff of the everyman calling out the absurd. Megyn was a cello string of sharp, measured dissection. And poor Don Lemon, he was the off-key kazoo wheezing the background, forever puzzled why no one took him seriously anymore.
Now, I do not know what the motivation for demonizing this particular medication is. Again, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist, but I would imagine some of it has to do with money. The reason being is that it is a generic drug now. The patent has run out. So anybody can make it, and it's worth like 30 cents a dose. Now, Merck has its own antiviral that's supposed to do the same thing that they claim ivermectin does, as does Pfizer. They're both about to release it. I don't know if that's why the FDA is making snarky tweets about it being veterinary medicine, but I do know that it was used for humans for fucking years before they ever started using it for animals. And I also do know that...
But this wasn't just about Don Lemon. It was about what he stood for. To Rogan, he was the inevitable product of a system that rewards echo chambers and punishes genuine curiosity. To Megyn, he was a cautionary tale for anyone foolish enough to confuse visibility with credibility. Their roasts weren't just personal takedowns. They were autopsies of an era that prized image over intellect and volume over value. As the media landscape shifted, podcasts overtaking prime time, authenticity bearing affectation, Lemon found himself adrift, lost in a sea of content he couldn't control, narratives he couldn't dictate, and audiences who, finally, had the power to change the channel. Joe and Megyn didn't need to scream it. They simply pointed to the wreckage and said, asterisk, this is what happens when you believe your own press releases, when you mistake airtime for impact, when you stop evolving because you think you've already arrived. Asterisk, their laughter wasn't cruel. It was a long overdue cleansing.
And you want to be in political office, you might need to do a competency test. And here was Don Lemon reacting to that on CNN.
This whole talk about age makes me uncomfortable. I think it's the wrong road to go down. She says people, politicians or something are not in their prime. Nikki Haley isn't in her prime. Sorry. When a woman is considered to be in her prime in her 20s and 30s and maybe 40s.
What are you talking? Wait.
That's not according to me.
Like cracking open a window in a stuffy room. It was the moment everyone realized the emperor not only had no clothes, but had been streaking through the newsroom for years while the crowd applauded. So as Don Lemon scrambled for relevance with half-baked podcast teases and desperate tweet storms, Joe chuckled and moved on to his next conspiracy theory, while Megyn glanced at the headlines and turned back to her mic. To them, Lemon was never the main course, just a side dish, overcooked, underseasoned, and long since sent back to the kitchen, as Lemon drifted in the digital abyss. Clinging to his bloated sense of relevance like a life raft made of recycled talking points, Joe and Megyn had already pivoted to dissecting fresher, juicier disasters. Don's legacy wasn't scandal or substance. It was static, background noise, and an age starving for clarity. His downfall wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a slow fade, a dimming of a light that was never really bright to begin with. In the end, the only thing louder than his exit was the silence that followed.